Karen Eber is a keynote speaker and chief storyteller. Her talk on TED.com, How Your Brain Responds to Stories and Why They're Crucial for Leaders, has almost 2 million views. As the CEO and chief storyteller of Eber Leadership Group, Karen helps companies reimagine and evolve how they build leaders and teams, transform culture, and tell stories. In her upcoming book, The Perfect Story, How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire, Karen leverages the science of storytelling to create engaging and immersive experiences. In this episode of The Communicative Leader, Karen walks us through the connection between leadership and storytelling. Hello, and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million-Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. So, Karen, thank you for joining us today on The Communicative Leader. You're an expert in storytelling, and what's more, you nestle it in communication and connect it to leadership. And I'm so excited to geek out with you over these areas today.
Same. This is going to be so fun.
Yes, right? Before we go into these ins and outs, can you give us a little background on yourself and what brought you to this area?
Yeah, I have a company, Eber Leadership Group, where we work with Fortune 500 companies on how they're building their leaders, teams, and culture. And I came to this from the other side of the desk, working as a head of culture and a chief learning officer in a business in General Electric and head of leadership for part of the business in Deloitte and working at Hewlett Packard. And so in those roles, I was always trying to help persuade people to make investment in leaders and in teams and technology. And I found that maybe one person could say yes and many people could say no. And stories were such a helpful way in those roles to persuade and slow the no's. And so as I opened my company and gave my TED Talk, it's a space that we have leaned into quite a bit.
Yeah, what a cool way to capitalize on all of those experiences. And listeners, if you're not familiar with some of these other companies, I'm sure we've heard the names, but the cultures of these companies are phenomenal. These are things that literally in classrooms we teach as best practice and a gold standard. And I just love that you get to bring that and capitalize on that in a larger way now. So, Karen, we know your background, this passion. I want to hear a bit about your personal view of storytelling. And I think we know a textbook definition. We have our own ways of thinking of storytelling. But as this world-renowned expert, what should we be mindful of as it relates to storytelling?
I like to think of storytelling as I heard a physician say this in Doctors Without Borders. He describes storytelling as the basic unit of human understanding. And so it's not just this dynamic way to communicate. It really becomes a fundamental way to exchange information in a memorable way. And I find that in business settings, we shy away from this thinking I have to present data or I have to just do a presentation because that's too soft, or maybe people will lose respect for me. But what we're really doing when we do that is just wasting the most precious thing people can give us, which is their attention. And when you start to incorporate some of the science of storytelling and are mindful to use it so that it does capture the audience's attention, your messages just have a better impact. They land more, they land strongly, and people are more likely to take action and remember them later. And so the first message is it's not a nice to have or a soft thing. The more things become automated, the ability anyone has to help connect with people on a personal level, on an individual level, is key.
Bingo. Yes. And I love that idea of it being a basic unit of human connection. Right? So if we even think about the way that we raise children, and I kind of skipping ahead, but if we take that approach with our youngest and most impressionable and use it as a foundation for solid ethics, morals, general understanding, you're right. It's kind of counterintuitive that as adults we tend to abandon it, just kind of toss that to the side. Excellent. So, Karen, I want to think about your TED Talk. And in this talk, it's widely viewed. If you haven't watched it yet, listeners, you need to. Karen talks about storytelling as something that is engaging and creates immersive experiences. And when I was preparing for this, I'm like, yes, I completely agree. But I realize I don't have the language necessarily or the explanation to articulate that. So we know it's powerful, but can you kind of talk to us about that engagement and the immersion?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are happening in the brain when someone is listening to a story or reading it. And the first is that you end up using just more real estate of the brain. So, just in a regular lecture or meeting, when
Mm-hmm.
someone's giving an update, a small walnut sized part of the brain is activated called Wernicke's area. And this is just pure language comprehension. Words go in, your brain says, yes, we know them, or no, we don't, and it's understood. When you start listening to a story and you are getting your senses engaged and you are hearing more dynamic descriptors, we go from this walnut size of the brain to using almost the full spectrum of the brain. And so right away, real estate, tells us more is better. But more importantly than that, a few things start to happen as we're listening to a story. The first is that the listener's brain or the reader, their brain will light up in the same activity as the storytellers. So there were these experiments where people were taken into a MRI machine. They were shown an episode of a BBC show, and their brain activity was measured. And then those same people were put back into the MRI machine a second time. And this time they had to recount those episodes that they saw, and their brain activity was measured. And then the third time, new people went into the MRI machine. They listened to the recording of the recounted episode that the first person had. So you had someone that watched it, recounted it, and then people that listened to the recounting. And what they found across all three instances was very, very similar neural activity. And this term neural coupling came up. It was from a neuroscientist, Yuri Hassan, out of Princeton, which is recognizing that we have a very similar pattern. We have this mirrored activity when we're listening to stories, which, said in simple terms, it makes storytelling almost like this artificial reality for the person experiencing it, because your brain puts you in it. This is why we're watching the movie and our heart is racing as James Bond runs across a rooftop, even when we're sitting in the chair not moving. But also, as someone tells a story, think of those moments where you feel a wave of goosebumps, or you feel the anticipation, or maybe even your eyes well up a little. That is because that when someone is telling a story, that creates an increase in empathy in the listener. And that leads to an increase in the bonding chemical oxytocin. So
Okay.
oxytocin sends this silent signal to the brain of, this person feels safe to be around. I feel a connection around them. It's often a hormone for mothers and babies. And you can't fake it. You can't command it. It's
Yep.
something that is a true response to this moment. The more oxytocin an individual has, the larger increase in trust that the person experiences for the storyteller. So the very act of a leader telling a story can lead to this neurochemical shift, but also lead to this increase in trust. So if you think of a offsite or maybe a team retreat that you've been on, and you come away feeling a little more bonded with the people around you, it's because you told these stories over meals and had these moments of bonding that are genuine and true. And so neurologically, all of that is happening when we're listening to a story. And it's not enough to tell one. The way you tell one is going to make a difference in the way someone experiences it.
Gosh, there's so much important content in there. And I think for me, the takeaways as an organizational scholar, psychological safety, thankfully, is a huge concept now that is widely talked about, because for decades and decades and decades, we just overlooked that, right? It didn't matter. It wasn't relevant. But if we are able to literally up these hormones that help people to feel safe, and then we can recognize how that is going to kind of translate in that psychological safety, We've recently done an episode on employee voice and speaking up. We can see how this can be a really lovely catalyst to transforming a culture in a pro-social way. And you're smiling, you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I love that you do this. This is phenomenal, Karen.
Yeah, psychological safety is key. Is the
Mhm,
foundation
mhm,
for creating any healthy work environment.
mhm,
I, like you, have am so happy it's in the zeitgeist, because for years people heard the
mhm.
terms and pictured couches and got really nervous.
Yes, yep.
But I talk to people about it as really it's the energy of work, because when
Mhm,
psychological safety isn't present, energy is drained trying to anticipate which version of the leader is going to show up, which version of the meeting do we have to prepare
mhm,
for. The uncertainty is
mhm,
expensive. And so
mhm,
that eliminates energy or calories that can go to
mhm,
actually
mhm,
getting the work done. When psychological safety is present, all of that energy goes to the work, and you're not feeling as depleted or
mhm,
drained from what's happening. And so when you tell a story that does create this neurochemical shift, and it does have oxytocin released in the listener's brain, and it's this subtle, like, this person is safe to be around, it's a
mhm,
calorie savings, right? You were
mhm.
getting this connection and helping people feel comfortable in a way that they may not. Or if you're going through a
Mhm.
big organizational change that you need to do to forge some of these things that are really just draining calories, draining energy.
Yeah. And I like that that's a simple equation, but powerful. Uncertainty equals expensive, right? And we could
Mhm.
look at expensive in a number of different perspectives. But I think when we reduce it to that, that is the most telling of ways to explain what uncertainty does to individuals and to work and to organizations.
Yeah, I want to give credit to that to
Mhm,
Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's a neuroscientist out of Northeastern. She
mhm,
does a lot. She has a wonderful book about emotions and how they're made. But
mhm,
given the challenges in the world today, you are seeing her pop up in more common newsday, regular articles and stuff.
mhm.
And I think that's a really powerful thing of, in a time of uncertainty, uncertainty is really expensive, and it has a toll,
Yeah.
whether that's in the world, in life, in work. And so
Mhm.
she's a great place to dig into for understanding of all of that.
Yeah, excellent. So, Karen, I want to keep fangirling over your TED Talk for a few minutes and integrate your book, The Perfect Story: How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire. So, when we think of stories, I think for some people, this is still maybe a little bit abstract because we might think stories or hear stories and think about reading with our children or maybe when we were a child. But what are other everyday ways that we see or use storytelling?
Any possibility. There are stories that can create a shift in energy,
Mhm,
or that can start to can bond in the most artificial of circumstances. So I share this in the book. I, really early in my career was at my first business dinner. And so I show up.
mhm,
I'm an introvert, by the way, very key to the plot. I show up, first business dinner, it's to have dinner with different companies that are thinking about working together, and they wanted to work with my company. So I'm like
mhm,
bracing myself for a sales pitch. This already feels incredibly awkward, and I have no idea what to talk about. And I
mhm,
show up, and luck would have it that the entire table was the introverts of introverts. I mean, the energy at this
mhm.
table was one where you're looking around the restaurant wishing you were at any of these other tables, because they were so lively. And we were like, we are
Mhm,
the awkward table. It's like,
mhm.
on the last day of a helium balloon when it's like sinking slowly to the floor. Like, that was our table. And we're doing everything we can to avoid talking, because no one knows what to do.
Mhm,
Because anytime we try to talk, it falls flat. So we're, drinking water or picking at our
mhm,
food. And this one man at the table says, he clears his throat and he says, so I'm putting a deck on my house.
mhm,
And we all are surprised and looking at him like, what is
mhm.
he talking about? But also, thank goodness someone is talking. Great. What
Yes.
is this
Yep.
deck for? Tell us
Yes.
about it. Yeah. And so he starts describing how he had to relocate this wood pile because
Mhm.
he needed to be able to put all the pilings in place. And he's on his second pass, stacking the wood in a wheelbarrow, moving it to the edge of the yard. He takes a log off the pile, comes face to face with a raccoon. He
Oh.
freezes, the raccoon
Mhm.
freezes, their hands are both up as though they're under arrest, which is
Yep.
even funnier because the raccoon has
Yeah,
the
yeah.
mask, right? And so
Mask
he's
on.
describing this. He gets up and he's like
Mhm.
demonstrating this, and we're all
Mhm.
laughing and watching,
Mhm.
like, what did you do? And he said
Yeah.
he took a couple steps back and the raccoon runs
Mhm.
off, right? So he tells the story. And the table completely shifted because then other people start telling
Mhm.
stories about unwanted house guests. And we went
Mhm.
from the silent table to the
Mhm.
table everyone was now looking at. And so this
Yep.
was a really artificial setting. You're here for a
Mhm.
business meeting, you don't know each other, it's about sales, you're all
Yep.
introverts, like a recipe
Mhm.
for disaster. But
Mhm.
that story shifted our energy and allowed for us to really start to enjoy each other. And here's the thing,
Mhm.
the guy that told the story, his name was Aaron. I took his call every time after that because
Mhm.
he felt like a friend and he was willing to be courageous in this moment and lead us to a
Mhm.
different space. And, I don't know if we ever did work together, but I was
Mhm.
always interested to talk to him. And so the when to use storytelling is really when not to use storytelling, which we could talk
Yep.
about that, but it doesn't have to be a
Mhm.
presentation or a TED talk
Mhm.
or a big formal speech or a toast. It can be in these moments where you just want to shift or you want to do something
Mhm.
different that can make a big dynamic experience.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's so powerful because we all find ourselves in these situations that are unexpected, uncomfortable, or then you're thinking about stress sweat instead of what we're there for.
Yes.
But you're right, using storytelling then, again, going back to that basic human connection, unit of human connection, as we have rapport, we have empathy, we're laughing together. And as you noted, that led to an open line of communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's phenomenal. Perfect, perfect story and way to integrate that. Yeah. The short of it is there it's always a time for storytelling.
The
So
only time
yeah,
if we
that's what I was gonna
didn't,
ask then.
yeah,
So
the
when
only
do we
time it's not to tell stories,
Uh-huh.
um, I will get the question, what story should we tell for return to office?
Mm,
Shouldn't.
mhm, mhm,
When you have a decision like that, a policy, a
mhm.
mandate, don't dress it in a story. Because the
Yeah.
moment you do, everyone listening or reading, they're going to detect it. We are really good
Mhm.
at sniffing out what feels like
Yes.
manipulation or
Yeah.
that isn't true. And the moment you do that, you lose the trust of the people around you. Instead, communicate them. I always say treat people
Mhm.
like an adult, just communicate
Yep.
it. Use
Mhm.
stories to talk about the challenges in the organization that you're overcoming and how you're pursuing the strategy or what you've learned or failures, but don't use it to dress up something because you think there's like a perfect way to tell this that people are going to love. Just put yourself in the place of,
Mhm.
if I heard this wrapped in a story, would I feel like I was being manipulated or would I feel
Mhm.
like it's helpful? And
Yep.
generally, policies, regulations, just communicate them. The rest of the time,
Yeah.
use stories.
Mhm. Yep, that makes perfect sense, and like you said, it's a gut check, but we can also do a quick audience poll with others and say, "Is this how we'd wanna receive this message?" And like you said, it's probably resounding, "No, just tell me what I need to do and
Yep.
why and when, and we're good." Yep.
Yep.
So, Karen, another thing I really enjoyed about your book is it's rooted in neuroscience. And this is not something that I have a background in. It was really fascinating. And you talk about these five factory settings of the brain and you relate them to creating messages and how we communicate. So, could you? This is a multi part question, but kind of walk us through these settings and kind of give us some understanding of what's at play in the background. So, for giving a talk, seeking to persuade, even working, messaging to get kids to clean up or eat broccoli, not killing one another. How does this relate to our brain and messaging?
The most underlying definition of the five factory settings of the brain are that it's not enough to tell a story. The way you tell one
Mhm.
is going to make a difference. And there are certain ways our brain naturally responds to communication and stories. And I believe when people can understand these, they recognize they have different choices to make when telling a story so
Mhm.
that they can pull different levers. They can make choices of how they want to tell a story. So they're a bit involved. We'll do the
Mhm.
lighter version. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the five and then I'll talk through each one and what the
Awesome.
considerations are. The first one is that your brain is lazy. The second is that it makes assumptions. The third is that it stores experiences and memories into this library of files. The fourth is it sorts in and out groups. It sorts people and experiences into in groups
Mhm.
and out groups. And the fifth is that it seeks pleasure and it avoids pain. So if we take the
Check,
first
check,
three,
check.
yeah, if we take the
Mhm.
first three, that your brain is lazy, it makes assumptions and it sorts information into this library of files. What that means is the brain being lazy. This comes from some of that research from Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. So
Mhm.
think of your brain like a broker. Number one goal, keep your body alive. And that's a combination of running all the systems and keeping your body actually functioning, but it also is helping make predictions for how do I move my foot when I'm going downstairs. So your brain
Mhm.
is constantly making these predictions, which is tied to the second one around the assumptions, because
Mhm.
the faster your brain makes predictions, the faster it can conserve calories.
Mhm.
The number one goal of the brain is not to go bankrupt of calories, it's to keep you
Mhm.
alive. So it's always going to be trying to make these decisions of where is it worth spending calories and where it isn't. Running your body isn't a choice. It knows it has to put calories there, but where you pay attention to is a choice. And so your brain won't be immersed all the time, right? You're naturally going to drift out in a conversation, in a meeting, in a movie, in a book, because that's natural. Our brain kind of dips in and out to reflect, reset, and to take a lighter moment. These are the nights you come home, you're exhausted, and you put on the TV show that you've binged or the movie that you've seen several times because you just don't want to think. That's your body saying, like, let's conserve some calories here. What that means in a story is that you're going to need to make the brain spend calories. You're going to need to put in unexpected events or build the tension or put in specific details that makes the brain hit a speed bump and say, huh?
Mhm.
Because it can't make the assumptions that it's trying to make. So this is how the first two play together, right? The brain is
Mhm.
always trying to hoard calories. It's going to naturally be making assumptions because the faster it makes a prediction or an assumption, the faster it can conserve calories. So you want to disrupt its assumptions. We learn when we get a prediction or an assumption wrong. It's called a prediction error. So you want to put in things in that story that are going to make the brain say, "Oh, I didn't see that company. I didn't see that coming." This is the joke where the punchline you were like, "Oh, I did not see that." And
Mhm.
you feel it, right? That's your brain being like, "All right, we're going to put a calorie
Mhm.
to this."
Yeah.
And those pair with this idea that as we take in information through our senses, they get stamped with emotions. So it's almost
Mhm.
like when you take a photo on your phone, if you swipe up, you can see that stamped on that photo is the location, the date, the f stop, the size of the
Yeah.
photo, the aperture, like everything is stamped on there without you doing anything. Something similar happens when we're taking in information through our senses as we're experiencing emotions. These memories, these experiences get stamped with emotions and they get stored in our long-term memory. And
Mhm.
these get put into what I call the library of files of, is this something
Mhm.
we've already done and it's validating it? Is this, known and familiar? Or is this related to something we've done, maybe slightly
Mhm.
different? Or is this brand new? Do we need a whole new folder?
Yeah.
The brain scans this library of files subconsciously to make predictions.
Mhm.
All of our understanding, decisions, assumptions, they're coming off of our experiences.
Yeah.
So the three of these play together because you want to make the brain spend calories, you want to slow down assumptions, and sometimes you want to connect to what people know because they immediately get an understanding of what you're trying to do in the story. So when I say connect to what people know, I mean something like when the Cathedral of Notre Dame was on fire,
Mhm.
the news stations in the US would show the location. They would put up a map and show you the cathedral on fire, but then they would show you the Eiffel Tower. For many people, when you hear Paris, you think of the Eiffel Tower. And so they're trying to
Yep.
like anchor to what you know of, oh, here's where it is in
Mhm.
Paris.
Mhm.
And it's just a subtle anchoring to what people know.
Mhm.
Those things can make a difference in a story and they become different choices. And then the last two factory settings
Yeah.
play together because we are naturally seeking these in groups and out groups. And this is where psychological safety comes in as well. In groups are ideas, beliefs, individuals, people that we share a familiarity with. It
Mhm.
could even be aspirations when we're buying something because of what we want to become. That
Mhm.
is a part of an in group where there's something that is familiar and comfortable. There's often psychological safety in that of this feels comfortable and
Mhm.
known. Out groups are where we notice our differences. And charities do this like when there's a natural
Mhm.
disaster and you hear the story of one person who lost their home, is struggling to get food, clothing, shelter. And you're listening to this inside your home with electricity and food near you, and you recognize how different your circumstances are.
Mhm.
And so an out group isn't bad, it's different, and
Mhm.
recognizing that different. And when you're telling a story, you have this choice of, am I trying to create a story where people feel like a member of an in group or an out group or both, depending on what we're
Mhm.
doing in the story. And the
Mhm.
last is that at our most simple level, we seek pleasure and avoid pain. So we have the cocktail of neurochemicals that are dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin that are released in moments of reward, connection, bonding. And
Mhm.
these are the feel good ones. These are the goosebump ones and good moments.
Yeah.
There are also neurochemicals like adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol that are released in moments where we need to focus, where there's something not quite right, and the body is saying, pay attention. When we listen to stories, we experience these shifts in neurochemicals depending on how compelling the story is. And so you want to be thinking about, am I telling a feel good story or a
Mhm.
story that brings joy, or am I telling a story that is intentionally
Mhm.
uncomfortable? So all of these five give you a range of things from how you're making the brain pay attention and spend calories to either
Mhm.
lean into assumptions or slow them to leaning into what is familiar for the person and how you can relate to them,
Mhm.
that help them connect to experiences they've had, to whether they feel a member of an in group or an out group or both, or even whether you're telling an uncomfortable story or not. And so these then get to the way the story is told makes a difference in the experience.
Mhm. Yeah, that thank you. Thank you for all of that. I've learned so much in those couple moments, and I when you were walking us through that, I found myself going back to the story you shared about that business dinner. And I guess, kind of as a check, would a prediction error perhaps be when Aaron said, "Hey, I'm building a deck"? Would that be the kind of moment that disrupted
It could be,
the
yeah.
flow?
Yeah. So we often hear prediction errors around like the body. So say you're going to stand up and you stumble.
Mhm.
That's the brain
Mhm.
saying, nope, we didn't send the right things down the right
Mhm.
pathway. We need to do that different
Mhm.
next time.
Okay.
But there is still a version of this of we are making
Mhm.
assumptions all the time. So when
Yep.
someone starts talking, we're like, oh gosh, what is Aaron going to talk about?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you get this surprise. Oh, I didn't see that.
Mhm.
Okay, you do get the
Mhm.
nope, we were wrong. Now we
Yep.
want to pay attention so that we can learn differently. Yeah.
Mhm. And I was thinking too, and I'm not sure if this is how it works, but when you're talking about, and I'm sure all of these things happen instantaneously in our brains, but the in and out, I was thinking about how just the emergent act of storytelling can collectively allow us to kind of then sort as a group into this in, like recognizing, like you said, this feels good. We have these hormones, a sense of safety. Do you see it kind of functioning that way too? Or is it a little
Yeah.
different?
No, it does. If you think of a job interview, a job
Mhm.
interview is a chance as a candidate to demonstrate where you are a member of an in group and where you are a
Mhm.
member of an out group. So you want to demonstrate where you're a member of an in group, where you are a great candidate for that role. You've got the knowledge, the
Mhm.
experience, you relate well to the team. You're an addition. You're not,
Mhm.
a culture fit. You are bringing unique things to it, and they can
Mhm.
see that, right? That is this person feels like they would bring wonderful things, and that's great.
Mhm.
You also, though, want to show where you're a member of an out group where you have experiences that they don't have. And that's part of this
Mhm.
addition. You are bringing things that complement but don't compete in a way that feels
Mhm.
like, oh, this person would never be successful here.
Yep.
And both are important in a job interview because you
Mhm.
want to make sure you are helping them really understand your value. So
Mhm.
in a context like that, you can start to see, yeah, it's important to think about both, and how am I different, and now how
Yeah.
do I tell that in a way that is welcoming and exciting to the organization.
Mhm. Yeah, I think they're just, any way we look at storytelling, the more time we spend thinking about it, the more we recognize it's ever present and such a helpful device, a safety device. I don't even know if device is the right word, but like a powerful element at play. And the more time we spend thinking about it, the more that we can lean into that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's so fascinating. So, Karen, this next question, we've kind of touched on this because we've just spent a lot of time thinking about the way the brain works. And so, what happens in our brains when we listen to stories versus listening to just information?
Yeah, it's a bit of what we touched on of that Wernicke's area, where this walnut-sized part of your brain, it's almost like your brain has this lexicon. So I'm listening to
Mhm.
you talk, or I'm listening to a lecture in
Mhm.
university, or someone's giving an update, or maybe I'm even reading something, and the brain is subconsciously comparing all of those things that it is taking and processing to the lexicon, and it's saying, um, do I have understanding of this? Yes or no,
Mhm.
right? And when it's
Mhm.
no, we either decide, well, let me learn what that is, or I don't know it. We're just going to move on.
Yep.
But that is it, and we're not
Mhm.
committing to memory. We're not interacting
Mhm.
with it in any way. And so, because we've just walked through the 5 factory settings of the brain, and I gave
Mhm.
the example of Paris, and I said
Mhm.
that the maps were showing the Cathedral of Notre Dame, but also the Eiffel Tower, and now you're picturing the Eiffel Tower in your head. That is part of what stories do. Just by saying
Mhm.
the Cathedral of Notre Dame on fire, your brain probably pulls up some image of that, whatever that means to you. Or when I mentioned the Eiffel Tower, your brain does that. I'm not
Mhm.
asking you to do it. You're not even asking your brain to
Mhm.
do it. It's just doing it because of
Mhm.
this library of files and because we make predictions.
Yep.
It's almost like your brain is going, this one, oh yeah, we know what that is. Okay. And
Mhm.
so it becomes so much more dynamic because it's giving your brain
Mhm.
things to engage with in a different
Yeah.
way. And the more you engage with it, the more you're going to think about it, the more you're going to have it be memorable, the more likely you're going to take action on it. And so, from a attention standpoint alone, attention is the biggest gift that our audience can give us. A story is
Mhm.
going to just make your words have so much more weight and value.
Yeah, and to just think that information, and certainly it's not to dismiss the importance of sometimes just conveying policy, procedure, but from this kind of simple binary, do I understand this? Do I not understand it? Maybe a follow-up, do I need to learn more? Or can I dismiss this?
Right.
To this very vivid, engaging, like you said, dynamic picture that then is making all of these other connections for us. I mean, that's such a powerful way for us to consider these differences in delivering content.
And what happens, unfortunately,
Mhm.
is that it is really hard to be a leader now. The demands
Mhm.
on your time are extraordinary because it's not just
Mhm.
delivering business results, which that alone is enough. It is,
Mhm.
leading in this time and making sure that you are developing the skills like empathy and balancing
Mhm.
empathy and accountability, and all of these things are new skills for many people, and being able to bring the best out of every individual. Some of these
Mhm.
are just very different types of skills. And the tendency when there's a presentation is that we just don't leave ourselves enough time to prepare. And so there's no story to tell if you haven't given yourself enough time to think about one, and telling
Mhm.
one in the moment can be uncomfortable until you've had some practice at it.
Mhm.
I find most people spend maybe a couple hours working on the slides they want to share and maybe 5 minutes thinking about what they want to say. And the problem with that
Mhm.
is that no one will remember what you said. No
Mhm.
one is going to be really moved or engaged by it. And it's
Mhm.
such a misstep that we do, because if you really want to
Mhm.
make sure people are taking information and making a decision, having a discussion, taking action, you need to be thoughtful about how you're pulling that together and
Mhm.
repurposing the time to think about the best way to really engage the audience and do that is important.
Yeah, and even I was just thinking of flipping that usage of time and spending the couple hours considering what's the story, what is the beginning, the middle, the end, what are these key messages? And then maybe just one or two slides, maybe some image-based slides would be enough to just have that
Completely.
background.
Right. Because
Um,
instead we open
mhm.
PowerPoint or whatever our favorite tool is,
Yep.
and we start picking slides as though we're picking pieces of a quilt
Oh,
patchwork that we're going
mhm,
to put together. And, oh, I can use this one. I can use
mhm.
this one. And then you're
Yep.
piecing together and like, that's enough. But you haven't stopped to
Mhm,
think about, who am I talking to? What is it that I want them to do? What are the right messages for that? And then at the very
mhm.
end, what are the visual aids, including with data? We let
Yeah.
the content drive it, but by doing that, we end up not communicating anything.
Mhm. Yep, the aid becomes a crutch and taking away from the story.
Yeah.
So this next question, and you've kind of already started to touch on this, and I'm really interested in your perspective, considering your experience and your organization now. But what do you wish, Karen, more of our leaders, our formal authority, managers, directors, maybe CEOs? What do you wish they knew about the effects of storytelling and the connection between storytelling and leadership?
I think you can't have one without the other. I think that there are leaders that are nervous to tell stories because they don't
Mhm.
want to share personal information.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
storytelling is personal. 100% storytelling is personal. But personal doesn't mean private.
Mhm.
Private are things that you don't care to share with others. Maybe
Yep.
that's things about yourself or your family. I have a very high privacy barrier. I don't share
Mhm.
stories about my family, but I will gladly tell you stories about mistakes that I made,
Mhm.
because I want people to learn. I can use that as an anecdote. And so your privacy barrier will be different. Each person has a different privacy barrier, but every story you tell is personal, even if you're telling someone else's story, because you are making it personal from your perspective and why you were the one telling it. And I think that that word personal gets really intimidating to leaders, who then think, well, I don't want to get up and say the most personal thing ever or be extremely vulnerable. And they miss that sharing your perspective on the latest strategy, or your perspective on something the team did that you're proud of. You go and you go behind the scenes and share some of these things. They go such a long way, and people feeling like you trust them enough to share it with them, and to creating a community of psychological safety. If you want to be a great leader, you need to embrace storytelling, and you need to practice getting to your style of personal stories and sharing things that are going to connect with your team.
I love that they're intertwined and not, they're indispensable to one
Yeah.
another. So, Kieran, I have two final questions for you. And we always, on the Communicative Leader, we end thinking really pragmatically about leadership or leadership communication. So, first, for our formal leaders, we've kind of talked about that already. So, let's think about employees, all ranks, all industries. What what is going to be helpful for them, or maybe what can they start to do when they're interacting with their own manager or their own teams in order to use storytelling to be more effective, persuasive communicators?
Yeah, the trick of storytelling is it actually isn't the story, it's the audience. The
Mm,
stories always start with the audience. So this is true whether you are getting ready to give a communication, share a communication, or tell a
mhm,
story. Ground yourself with these four questions, because every communication should start here. You want to think about who you're talking to and what is it that you want them to come away thinking or feeling after you're done sharing your story. You want to, and write out a sentence for this. You
mhm,
want to write out a sentence for, what do you want them to to know or do after.
Mhm.
So part of it is the thinking
Mhm.
and feeling, the shift, the internal shift, and then part of it
Yeah.
is the external shift. And then you want to think about where's their mindset today and what might be an obstacle. And this can be done in 5 minutes before a meeting. But what you're
Mhm.
really trying to do is take a moment to think about what is it that I'm trying to do and who am I doing this for? And let me just take a brief moment to try to get some
Mhm.
empathy for like who are they and where are they at today. So if you're getting ready for a one-on-one with your leader,
Mhm.
and perfect time of year, we are coming up into some of year-end activities, performance
Mhm.
review, things like that. Take a moment to think about like what do you want them to come away feeling about you or thinking about you.
Mhm.
Maybe even give yourself a word that you want them to think of when they think of you.
Mhm.
What do you want them to do? Is there any action that you want them to do? Think about that. What does that look like?
Mhm.
Where is their mindset today given all of those things? And is there anything that could be an obstacle? Because when you get clarity on those things,
Mhm.
you can take a communication or a story and make sure you are telling it in a way that you hit those things.
Mhm.
So the biggest piece of storytelling is it has absolutely nothing to do with the story. It always begins with the audience.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And when you're saying these, it's making me think about servant leadership. And this is a slight twist, but servant leaders are essentially looking to remove obstacles for others. And it sounds like in this way, what really strong storytellers can do in thinking ahead of time: who is my audience? What are their needs? What are my hopes? What are possible obstacles or motivation blocks that I need to be aware of? And recognizing that, as you said, when we take a few minutes to reflect, we don't need to spend days for this. And I'm sure the more we practice it, the easier it gets. But recognizing that we can have a much better outcome in doing this little bit of earlier legwork.
Mhm. You might not remove the obstacle, but the story is going to help you
Mhm.
navigate it or see maybe even a
Mhm.
completely different path to go down.
Yeah. Yeah. And this last question, again, you've left us with so many tips, but I'm wondering if there's one tip for those who are either striving for management or currently in it. Is there something that today they can start doing to think about how they become better storytellers?
It is truly looking for an opportunity to tell a story. So recognize no one is going to invite you to do it. No one's going to say start the meeting or a presentation or your update with a story. No one is going to say don't share the data. Tell us the story. Find a moment
Mhm.
that you're just going to try telling a story in a one-on-one in a meeting. Think about what that is.
Mhm.
Do it because the thing about storytelling is it is compounding interest, and telling a story earns you the right to tell more stories. The most
Mhm.
intimidating thing is you have to start. And so finding what feels like a not threatening way, a not intimidating place to
Mhm.
tell one is key. And it really comes down to like set an agreement with yourself that you are going to tell one story in the next week. And maybe it's just
Mhm.
with a coworker in a casual meeting, but when you start looking for opportunities and you see them, then you can start doing it more and
Mhm.
more and more. And the
Mhm.
stories then help shape your leadership and shape how people understand you.
Mhm.
Anyone that can open doors and help people consider different perspectives or a different path are always greatly valued. And stories are such a great way to do that. And if you are an introvert and just naturally speaking up in settings like that doesn't feel comfortable, recognize that introverts have storytelling as a superpower because as you are reflecting, you sometimes notice details that other people don't,
Mhm.
which make for great opportunities to pull that in a thoughtful moment and help broaden an idea or a discussion.
Mhm. Gosh, that's so powerful. And I really like that idea too, is we can't wait for the invitation.
It
Because
won't
when does that
come.
come? You're not going to get called up on a stage or in a meeting. You just cue spotlights. You just
Let's take it a
start
step
small.
further. Not only
Yeah.
are you not going to get that
Mhm.
invitation, you're probably going to
Mhm.
be told, don't tell a story. Most of the
Mhm.
time when I am working with clients, we start first. They make a list of all these different times they've been told not to tell a story. And I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
put that list aside. Let's go. And they find an opportunity to tell one where they weren't invited and they were told not to tell one. And
Mhm.
100% of the time, it has always worked out wonderfully. So just
Mhm.
ignore the discouraging moments and find a
Yeah.
place to do it.
Yeah. And I think too for those folks, because like you're saying, I think so many statistics rule in business still. That's just where we are now. I think we're seeing that shift. You probably know that better than anyone. But I think that when you tell the story and you keep telling stories and finding those moments, people are actually going to remember your statistics and data better, more accurately, perhaps, when it is attached to these other things. And it might open up more opportunities for people to, like you said, look at you for leadership and your perspective.
Yeah, and even more than remembering the data, they're gonna remember the idea around the data because data are
Hmm.
about people and things and projects
Yeah.
and what we wanna do about it. And so that's what you really want. Data
Hmm.
never speaks for itself because we all
Yes.
make assumptions and our brains are
Hmm.
making these predictions based on our
Hmm.
experiences. All of our experiences are different. So when you aren't taking people through that, you are risking people making their own assumptions and they're all different and we don't know. But when you can take people through that story, you're getting everyone to a common place for a discussion and come away remembering the same things.
Hmm. Gosh, Karen, thank you. I've had so much fun. I've learned so much. I know I'm going to be returning to this conversation many times, and I want to thank you again for sharing your experience, your time, and your expertise with us.
Thank you for having me. Such a fun conversation.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.